Hello and welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy and governance. I am Shafiu Suleiman. The Ekiti Governorship election, which held over the weekend, is still generating reactions in the polity, despite issues raised by stakeholders who observed the poll. Majority reported that it was peaceful. On whether the election was free and fair, many observers described the exercise as one characterized by vote buying and heavy inducement of the electorate. In fact, the two major political parties had, in a trade of words, accused one another of being culpable. With the Ekiti Governorship election being the first major election to be conducted by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, with the new electoral law in place, it is expected to set a precedence ahead of the 2023 general election. On Daily Politics today, we'll be discussing the outcome of the Ekiti Governorship election as well as other issues arising from it. I have in the studio Emmanuel Njoku, is a Director, Governance and Democracy for Connected Development.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by Paul James. We are joined by Mbu Eno, who is the head election observation for Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. He is joining us via Skype to give us his perspective on this election. Let's now take a quick break. When we return, the discussion will commence. Thank you very much for staying with us. Still Daily Politics, and today our talking point is the Ekiti Governorship election, perhaps doing a postmortem of what transpired on Saturday. I will go straight to Mbu Eno, who is the head election observation Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development, who is joining us via Skype. Eno, thank you for joining us. Okay, let's start the discussion from here, perhaps while we get Mbu to respond. Now, Mr. Emmanuel, you happen to be at Ekiti, in Ekiti during this election, and you observed, what transpired and all of that. Let me start by getting your perspective. What really stands out for you as an election observer who has been observing election over the years?
So for the Ekiti election, one of the things that stood out for me is the very obvious improvement for INEC in their logistics, in their deployment. So usually we'll go to elections where you see by 9:30, by 10, you see the poll officials are just getting to their polling units. But in Ekiti, as early as 7:30, 8 o'clock, a lot of the poll officials were already on ground. At least by 8:30, close to 80 to 90% of the polling units were already on ground. Not just that, even the security deployments. By 8:30, most of the polling units were already set up and ready to start the process. And security personnel were all on ground very much earlier than you would expected. And so we are told these are the flashpoints, this here and there are the flashpoints. But surprisingly, the election happened and it was peaceful. And I believe all of that happened because of the new Electoral Act, the new Electoral Act 2022, and the provisions therein. So most of the things that usually will cause the unnecessary tension, the law has kind of, put a gauge on it that doesn't allow for all of that again. So the election for me generally was peaceful, and everything. So by already 4:30, 5 o'clock, most of the polling units were already done. Right. And another thing that actually stood out for me the most, I just remember now, was the INEC result portal. So so election finished, typical election is supposed to finish by 2:30, then they start counting, sorting, and then collation process starts. By 10 o'clock, about 10:15 p.m. of the same day, all the results, the 2,445 polling unit results, had already dropped into the election result portal. So at that point, you know, people that had situation rooms set up, even political parties, already knew who was winning. We've never seen that before. We've never had that before. To even see INEC declare results as early as, you know, before the daybreak of the next day. I mean, I couldn't catch up at some point. I slept off around 1:30 a.m. And by the time I woke up, the result was a winner has been returned.
Yeah.
You know. So
okay. Yeah. You talked about the improvement in terms of the deployment of logistics, especially the technology, you know, used by INEC. But substantially, some would say, election also deals a lot with humans, you know, human resource. And INEC, you know, has a number of officials, apart from those at the field, talking about the polling units, officials and what have you. You also have, you know, the electoral umpire itself deploying a number of, you know, supervisory officers. Take, for instance, we have 4 national commissioners. We also have 8 resident electoral commissioners, all for this election. And then looking at the size, you know, the size of the state, you know, some would say that's the reason why it was a bit easy or easier for INEC to be able to deliver in good time. Do you factor all of this in, put into consideration? Yes.
So frankly, Ekiti State is not a very big state in landmass. The farthest place from any part of Ekiti, you know, to the capital, I understand, is about 2 hours, 20 minutes. You know, and Ekiti State doesn't have far to reach areas. So that, frankly, I believe, played a major role in, you know, helping INEC to deliver the elections in the way they did. But however, it's still commendable because, so when you look at talking about far to reach areas, the FCT Council elections that happened sometime around February this year, you know, there are some polling units inside Hamac that the poll officers were still not there as at 9 o'clock, 9:30 a.m. In as much as it's just a 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes distance for them to be there. The poll officers were still not there. So we'll give it to INEC for the way they deployed, you know, the kind of mobilization they did, the kind of coordination they did. We'll give it to them. So for us as an organization, we want to always commend government institutions when they get it right. And I think in this election, to an extent, yes, they got it right.
Okay. We're very impressed. Still talking about INEC, for instance, you know, the electoral management body is also very conscious of the fact that we're operating under a new law. And all eyes are on it, you know, for a start, to see how it can deliver with this, you know, legal framework, so to speak. And then perhaps all other stakeholders are also mindful of the fact that they have to, you know, fall in line with the provisions of the Act. Do you think that has, you know, helped in shaping the thinking or changing the mindset and attitude of the electoral management body itself and then the stakeholders?
I think for INEC, the deployment of beavers, this is not the first time beavers is being deployed to an election. The beavers was deployed to a by-election in Delta State last year. The beavers was deployed to Anambra election. The beavers was deployed at the Federal Capital Council elections. So this is the 4th time. And so if you look at it from Delta to Anambra and the issues that happen in Anambra with the beavers, the shortcomings of the beavers, and then election within security as well in Anambra. And then looking at the obvious shortcomings of the beavers in the FCT polls, you know, it was a very terrible, disappointing outing.
It was very prominent.
It was a disappointing outing at the FCT Council polls. Now, I think INEC had used those elections more like a test run of the beavers. To perfect and correct the shortcomings of the beavers in the past elections. So before the elections, both the Ekiti State REC and the chairman had meeting with civil society, the Ekiti State had meeting with Situation Room. They all assured us that they are good to go. But you know, it's usually what they say. But when you get to the polls, it's something different.
You didn't take them serious until
So not like we didn't take them serious. We'll always give benefit of doubt. But surprisingly, positively, I'll tell you that it was. And so I've listened to the people that contested the elections, especially the candidate of the SDP. Usually after an election, you see the people that the losers talk about how they rigged the process, how they, how the deployment, but in this very case, if you noticed, the candidate of the SDP is not exactly talking about that the beavers failed him or that he's just talking about the part of the voter inducement.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. It got across based on the the feedback from people who are on ground. But let's bring in Mbu Eno, who is head election observation, CJID, which is Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. Mbu, are you there now?
Oh my goodness. I think I lost your audio. If you can hear me.
I hear you loud and clear. Mbu, I did say that, okay, bringing you on board now for you to give us your perspective on the conduct of the Ekiti election. Let's get your views. What were your takeaways, as you left Ekiti on Saturday?
Oh, thank you so much. First and foremost, just like James started, I would also want to commend INEC. A great deal of improvement in terms of logistics, and of course, the technological deployment was quite fantastic. But even though not without some bit of lapses, I think there is still an opportunity for improvement. One really, really good thing that INEC has done is also what James has said, early deployment of materials. On the other hand, I think what we saw was just that as much as the Electoral Commission is trying to improve the outcomes of elections, our politicians are becoming more sophisticated in vote buying. I'm not really sure there has been any election so far that this level of vote buying has been experienced. And that really puts us, the civil society, the media, and every single Nigerian needs to see what they can do from their own little corners to reduce that particular menace. It was unprecedented, as I said before, and of course, we've been hearing of vote buying before now, but the values at which the votes were bought this time was something really more significantly higher than previous elections. And that also because the politicians now understand the power of the vote of a citizen, and they also understand the fact that the technological deployment by INEC is really helping, is really making it difficult for them to rig through the process. It was possible before now for votes to be changed at ward collation centers, local government collation centers, but with the beavers, with the IREF technology deployed, the results come directly from the polling unit. That's why if you were monitoring the INEC results portal, as elections were being concluded, results started pouring in. As at 7 p.m. at one of those times, on Saturday, over 2,000 results were already in. And that shows that it's going to be very difficult for any politician to do any sort of manipulation at the collation centers. So the easiest way they could have done anything they wanted to do was to induce and buy votes. And that is where the work right now seems to be focusing on as a build up to 2023. It's a huge task. As much as INEC is improving, they need to improve, improve better. And one of the things that also came up as a result of the technological deployment was that at some point, It appears like the INEC ad hoc staff, from our observation, did not also were not really properly trained on. When I say some, I mean just a number of them, not a good number though. Were not properly trained on how to use the beavers, because if the facial recognition does not work, the instruction is use fingerprints. There were some polling units we found out that the ad hoc staff, once they try the facial recognition and it doesn't work, they just tell the voter, to go. So INEC also needs to work on proper training of their staff on the technology. Maybe we also need at some point a modality of telling ad hoc staff the number of times you need to try for a voter. How many times can you try to get a voter to be accredited before you can finally ask the person to leave? These are the conversations we need to have going forward.
Okay,
Overall,
well, thank you very much for that brief, background with regards to the election. As you're making the point, one of our guests also just came in talking about Paul James. He's a program manager elections, YAGA Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. We'll get back to you, Mbu, for more perspectives. But now let me engage James, as he just set in. Yes, Mr. Mbu is talking about the improvement witnessed, especially on the part of INEC in terms of deployment, in terms of the technology efficiency, and so on. But then it throws up a challenge. The challenge is now the politicians, the political actors have realized it is difficult, to manipulate the process. All eyes are on them. Election is done, electronically somehow, transmission of result also. So the attention now is on the electorate. Vying of votes has become prominent and is even brazen as it is. How much of a challenge does this constitute, to our electoral process as we move towards 2023 election?
Well, before then, I want to start off by saying I think we should not celebrate too soon, especially given the experiences we have seen with INEC in the past. One election could be good, and then you go to the next election, you hear different stories. But given that also, we must also commend some of the stakeholders that really made the Ekiti election what it is. One of which that I hope people don't mention is the influence of the traditional institution, especially the Ewe of Ekiti. His intervention, especially in speaking with the road transport workers just before the election, could have also helped in the early deployment of materials that we saw in the election. Almost everything played out for INEC and also for some of the stakeholders that were part of the process. The one that remains a challenge, like you rightly observed, is the politicians. What I saw with Ekiti is that the politicians are now becoming very lazy because they think there is an easy way out for them, the easy route. But then the easy route is also sadly affecting our elections. If you look at the trajectory in Ekiti elections, in 2014, the turnout in the Ekiti election was 49.1%. In 2018, the turnout in the Ekiti election was 45%. And here we are in this election, the turnout, according to INEC, is just 36%.
So it has been dropping significantly.
It has dropped in this election. So that brings also a lot of questions. That's why I said we should not celebrate too soon.
What could have been the reason now? Because there was mass mobilization. And then, there's also reported cases of enlightenment and the enthusiasm of the voters to also come out. So what could have been the reason behind the decline in the...
I started the point because I think the politicians are looking for easy way. They are lazy. My deployment was not just last weekend. We had people on ground since March. We started a long-term observation. We had 25 people across the 16 local governments, and I had visited the state about 5 times before the election. I did the training for the long-term observers in March. I went back in April and met with the stakeholders. I went back in May and also interfaced with the civil society. The feelers I got in May from the civil society was that voter education was low because for the civil society as of then, there was a paucity of resources to engage voter education. And then asked what the politicians were doing. The politicians were doing a door-to-door campaign, but in a negative light. They were going door-to-door and were inducing voters. Then they were giving voters as low as 500, 2,000. They stepped up the game in the election, and then some were giving 10,000, some were giving 3,000, 5,000, as the case may be. My fear is, just like we saw in the 2018, was that whatever is a template for Ekiti, you could likely see the template also repeated in other elections, especially the national election. We shouldn't also forget that just a few days to the election, one of the candidates for the presidential election made a very big pronouncement about money and money politics in the state. That could also be another reason.
Yeah, but we are dealing with, we're talking about 36 states and the FCT. Here is not, we're not talking about just a particular state where you can, well, I'm not doubting the resources, the war chest, the deep pocket possessed by some of these candidates as it is. But let's look at this, very critically, Emmanuel, talking about the change in narrative with regards to challenges in our election process, especially this money politics or voter inducement, and how we can tame it. Ekiti is known with the stomach infrastructure thing even before the election. The previous election, voter inducement was also high, and in fact from there it trickled down, to other places and what have you. But the brazenness and the massive, deployment of these resources to induce the voters, how do you think it can be tamed, especially in our contemporary situation where the weaponization of poverty, has made it extremely difficult for voters to say no?
You know what I saw in this election? I think, so gradually, what I saw is a good thing in a funny way. Good thing in the sense that power has finally come back to the people. Power is now with the people, and the politicians know this. And that is the reason they are buying votes. And people should understand that the reason now that they are buying votes, it means that the votes are beginning to count. Before now, what our typical Nigerians do is try to get some of the corrupt INEC officials, pay them, try to use intimidation, use thugs. But that has changed. The game has changed right now. The power has completely gone to the people. And
but how they are using the power is another thing also.
So elections, generally across the world, is transactional. So it's about, you're coming to tell me what you're going to do for us. As you are running for office. You're coming to tell me they are going to provide primary health care centers. You're coming to tell us they're going to give us education, free education, they're going to give us infrastructure on roads and all of that. The power is with the people, but the people are not negotiating rights. Now, the hunger, the poverty mentality is terrible. Vote buying, I'm not trying to, it's terrible. Vote buying that I saw is terrible.
Buying and selling, because it's transactional.
So we've never seen it at that level before. Vote buying, I've never seen it at this level before. People going as high as to buy votes at 10,000 naira. It only means that the only way...
In some cases, people were also provided soup material just to cook. I mean,
now,
there was a slogan for it.
But before I lose my
vote
thought...
and cook or something like
before
that.
I lose my thought, there was something he said earlier about the voter turnout. So the last election, I think the voter turnout was 45%, and this one, the voter turnout was 36.5%. So in between these numbers, 2018 and now, there's something you need to understand as well. That as at 2018, and just as at even last year, how elections work, we usually witness a lot of multiple thumb printing. A lot of multiple thumb printing. After election, you see politicians, rigging the process by raising the numbers. So a lot of times, those numbers you see and that voter turnout you see is not real. It's ghost voting and multiple thumb printing. But in this election, that we are seeing 36.5% of the votes. These are real numbers, verifiable numbers. People who biometrics we are used to accredit them.
But so, INEC has the voters register and what have you, and it accredits voters. It takes stocks of those who have collected their PBCs, those who have registered, those who have.
No, I'm talking about voter. I'm talking about voter turnout.
How does it affect,
people that turned out to vote in 2018 was 45% based on the number of votes that was cast in 2018. And here the number of votes were saying 36. So I'm telling you that between that number of 45% and 36.5%, that the difference is that the voters in this election are real voters. I don't think there was any space or any avenue for them to do multiple tampering, like we usually say in the past elections.
Okay, let me go back to Mbu so that he can give us a few of his perspective. Okay, I think we can go on now, but let me take James here. You know, talking about this trajectory and what is changing in the dynamics and so on, there were also reported cases, or some of the candidates have alleged actually that there was also some sort of violence orchestrated by, you know, those in power, the incumbent government or so, especially at their strongholds. Was it actually true, or is just, you know, a statement by politicians, you know, when they lose, always find something to say?
Well, when it comes to election, people always want to be territorial in their defense. So I wouldn't want to model into that politics by the politicians, especially because in the previous election, I heard you mention weaponization of poverty. I think we're also beginning to see weaponization of violence. Politicians will try to instill fear in people so they could reduce turnout and then inflate the votes in places that people don't turn out to vote. We have seen that in the Edo election in 2020, where in 18 of the local governments, 12 of the 18 local governments had different forms of pre-election related violence. The same also in Ondo. But in Ekiti, you can be specific. You can mention dates and location. One of the major incidents that occurred was in F1 in March involving the SDP candidate and supporters of the APC. Another incident that happened was also just last week, June, in Oye, that involved the Road Transport Employers Association of Nigeria and some party supporters that led to the death of one. And then the spill-off that happened in Old Garage on the 12th of June in town. And even with all of this,
those were pre-election issues.
These are pre-election issues, and you saw a quick intervention also on the part of the security. There hasn't been any that I know of reported cases of violence in this election. The concerns from these elections were, like we said, the concern around turnout, the concerns about some locations where ballot box snatching did occur, the concerns also around INEC officials not knowing how to use some of these devices. In fact, some of these issues are even laughable. We had a report, for instance, for a place where an official went through the entire process before he remembered he was supposed to use the beavers
to capture. Yeah. Perhaps it's still engrossed with the previous.
When he wanted to repeat the manual processes, the people chased him out of the community. So other than that, sincerely, to the best of my knowledge, there haven't been any reported cases of.
Does it have to do with the engagement of ad hoc personnel, or is it that INEC has not been doing, you know, enough in terms of training of this personnel? Well,
training can always never be enough, but then I think kudos to INEC this time compared with what we saw in the FCT. In the FCT, the people that the ad hoc staff that were trained were replaced in the morning of the election. That's why you have the majority of the problems from the FCT election. But in Ekiti, of course, you got 2,445 polling units where election did occur. It's always difficult to control to have the same quality across board. So I will say these are isolated cases, and of course, you can't rule out human errors in such big endeavor like what we saw in Ekiti. But we just hope that those few isolated cases, that INEC will also pick lessons from that and see how they can make it better for the subsequent elections.
Okay, it's about time we take a break. In case you're just joining us, the program is Daily Politics. And today, our talking point is Ekiti Governorship election that took place on Saturday. We're looking at the outcome of that exercise with experts, election observers who have been on the field, you know, to monitor this exercise. I've been interfacing with Emmanuel Njoku, a Director, Governance and Democracy for Connected Development Code. And Mbu Eno is Head Election Observation, CJID. CJID is Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. He's joined us via Skype to give us his perspective on the election. Also talking to us, this evening is Paul James, who is the Program Manager, Elections, IAGA Africa. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll take a break. When we return, we engage other issues that define, the Ekiti governorship election and perhaps propose solutions to some of those challenges encountered. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
Times have passed, and with it so many things that once were our visual delights. Technological advancement has brought about tremendous changes in the way and manner media deliver content to its audience.
As it continues to reposition itself to serve you much better, Media Trust Limited is rebranding its logo and visual identity to reflect our current vision and futuristic drive.
We have spread our tentacles beyond the pages of the newspaper to the digital space. The new logos and visual identities reflect the new scope of our multimedia reach.
Even with this development, however, we will continue to remain with you as we have always remained, committed to our founding philosophy, which is based on trust, integrity, openness, and courage.
The new logo, which is a marriage of a revolving globe and a mobile device, signifies the unlimited reach of our content on the digital space.
We are always the backbone of operations as we do our best to deliver content that suits your needs.
When you see a new trust title or platform in the next few days, therefore, do not be alarmed.
We remain committed to you and will continue to serve you through fair and responsible journalism.
Thank you very much for staying with us. It's still Daily Politics. And today we're looking at the just concluded Ekiti Governorship election, of course, with stakeholders who have been observing the election and, of course, giving us their perspectives and observations of the off-season election in Ekiti. Let me take on you now, Emmanuel. Yes, agreed that, there's substantial improvement in the conduct of the exercise, just as it has been said. And INEC should take, the credit and so on. But then looking at the political actors, in the build-up to the election and, of course, during the election and now after the election, what do you make up with their conduct generally? Are they also keen into the new thinking, a reformed electoral process in terms of, providing issue-based, where there are issue-based campaigns and the sportsmanship, the spirit of sportsmanship that is after the conduct?
For me, like you rightly said, I think some of our politicians are still lazy and they've not come to the full realization that it's no longer business as usual. Okay. Which is why they go through by every means possible to beat the party primary elections to emerge as candidates. And they now believe that once they come into the election, they still think that there's no need for all of those lots of issue-based conversations. They just do it for the sake of doing it because they always believe that at the end of the day, at the polls, they find a way to use money to buy the people. And it's a very sad development. And I say this because looking at the state of the nation, it's sad, but it's also a reality that a lot of Nigerians, when offered that amount of money, 10,000 naira, will sell their polls. And I say this like in the state. In
some cases, it's about 500 naira.
In the state where we went to, this is a state where state civil servants earn as low as 40,000 naira. This is a state where the average income is about 30,000 naira for 30 days. And someone is offering these people 10,000 naira to sell their votes. Frankly, they will sell their votes. So it's not necessarily about hunger, but it's about poverty mentality. Because I saw a lot of people who looked like, you see someone who is using a phone that is probably worth 60,000 naira, 70,000 naira, still selling their votes. So you see that is a big issue.
But what Paul is telling us is that most of this vote buying even took place before the election. So, at the point, the candidates are reaching out to the people, door-to-door kind of campaigns. That was what the actual buying took place. So what exactly stopped the people from? Well, yes, you have access to these politicians, and they are giving you whatever they're giving you. But you have your conscience. You also have the right to choose, a candidate that you think will change.
There's something I noticed in most of the polling units we went to. So we've seen situations where people say, hey, they will give you money. Yeah, you collect their money, but you still vote your conscience. That for me it doesn't sit right with me, collecting money and now voting your conscience. I see it as you also lack the integrity, because you don't collect money and vote your conscience. Now, but people that possibly ever thought of voting their conscience, it was almost impossible. Talking about secrecy of the ballot, in most polling units we went to, the voters that were queuing up were literally standing in front of the ballot box. So there wasn't secrecy. Yeah, there wasn't secrecy in most of the polling units where we went to. So they are giving you a ballot paper, and you've been paid, or you're about to get paid, because you've already committed that you are going to vote for a particular party, so you're about to get paid. So there is no room for you to vote your conscience, because the people are standing right in front of you there, and the person whose job it is to confirm where you voted is standing right in front of you. And this is not rocket science. If you are to vote for APC is right at the top of the ballot paper. If you are to vote for PDP or SDP, they are down at the ballot paper. So it's easy to even know if you voted your conscience, or if you voted based on the money that you are going to be given. So in other words, the secrecy of the ballot was completely compromised, and that also aided, and all of these things, to me,
it's compromised by who now? Because the electoral management body knew perfectly well that there is need, to create, the voting scenario in such a way that there will be secrecy and of course.
So let me say this one. In as much as we commend the election for being peaceful, commend the security personnel, I also think that the reason why there are security personnel in polling units, every polling unit had at least 4 security personnel in every polling unit. Their duty was also to organize.
Overmanned now.
Well, not overmanned, because there are polling units where you have as much as 1,500 persons. That's not overmanning. Why there were other polling units where you had less than 50 or less than 100? That could be overmanning of security personnel. But the point I'm saying is, those security personnel available in these polling units were supposed to organize, help the poll clerks, the INEC poll, the ad hoc staff, to organize the polling units in a way that they will ensure the secrecy of the ballot. But all of that didn't happen. And frankly, while we also commend the security personnel, all of this vote buying happened right in front of them.
We'll come back to that. Perhaps while the security agencies have a role to play, INEC has already exonerated itself and said there's nothing it can do. And we'll come to that, whether it actually has nothing to do about it. We have Umbu still joining us from Akure via Skype. Umbu, you've had the conversations here, looking at the issue of voter inducement and how it happens. Let me get your observation. What do you think is making this trending, especially in Ekiti, which is very, very synonymous with this stomach infrastructure, kind of politics?
My colleagues in the studio have actually spoken about it. I think poverty has been weaponized and used as a weapon, and used as a means of destruction against the people. So let's take, for instance, on the eve of the election, the ICIR published a story and a video accompanying it, showing an association like the Nigerian Union of Teachers sharing money from one of the candidates. Now, and mind you, Ekiti is known as one of the most educated states. And then the Teachers Association is the association responsible for grooming the young ones. If they themselves, in the video we saw the representatives of the NUT being called local government by local governments to come and collect their own parcel to go and share to their members. We cannot say that is illiteracy, because the body responsible for grooming the next generation is culpable in collecting their own share of bribe. Now we look at, just as been mentioned before, this state is a largely civil service state. And each government that comes continues to dwell on the fact that, oh, we don't have much allocation. So they continue, they barely think of developing the states to make it more productive so that it can move from a civil service state to either a manufacturing or a producing state. Because they remain low ranking in terms of allocation and in terms of resources, it is not enough to go around. So the best point in time where they feel they can show the masses some love is around elections. So they come and pay peanuts for their vote. And mind you, probably these are people that has not seen up to 5,000 in the last 1 week or 3 days or so. I mean, suddenly seeing 10,000 at a go. Of course, they will gladly sell their vote. And because associations that are looked upon as being responsible have also structured themselves to also benefit from the largesse, it makes the ordinary person on the street to naturally also want to take its own share. If associations like NUT, NURTW are formed themselves in such a way that they lead by example, become a good example to the general public, it would deter, it can serve as a form of deterrence to the citizens. And also they would take that as a good example. For instance, how would a teacher who has been captured on video going to collect bribe come back to the classroom now to teach the students not to vote? It's not going to be possible. So these are things.
A very big challenge, James, talking about stemming the tide, of this, voter inducement and so on. But one thing that would concern everyone is perhaps where are these monies coming from? Because yes, where are these monies coming from? If development perhaps would not reach the people, and then, in a state that is largely civil servant state and so on, and then, but yet when there are elections, people are ready to bring out money. Where are these monies coming from? And where are the authorities and agencies that should follow the money to ensure that it doesn't get into the wrong hands?
If I is following the money.
Yeah, I know they're following the money. Let me get your perspective first.
I wish I have an answer to this, but my sense is that politicians usually stack money because of for reasons like this. Like I was out on the street of Ekiti on the 8th and 9th. We went for voter education. My team and I went for voter education in Ado and also in Ilawe. And you meet some people like you, like, don't sell your vote. They'll ask you, who is it by? Because election time for some people is harvest time. Yes, right. But sincerely, I think politicians always know about this. They know the game is now about money.
So they rather starve people of development, but they stash money to use during elections.
Of course. And then you have also the agencies of government that are seeing this. Some of this now, some could be physical cash, yes, but some you will see the movement. What is done about that? We have heard stories about people importing or bringing money into the states during election. This huge consignments are ferried. They use the aircraft to bring this money. What is done about that? How did they pass? We have laws in this country that says how much you can hold if you want to travel. That's a cap, how much you can hold when you want to travel. We have seen videos, we have seen pictures of people bringing money in using the transport systems that we have in the country.
Emmanuel, why are we becoming helpless, so to speak, with all the agencies that are responsible? I've heard that, some arrests were made by EFCC operatives. I don't know how true was that. And then we talk about the massive, deployment of security agencies. 17,000 policemen on ground, 9,000 Defense Corps personnel on ground. Yet all of this is happening. Why are we helpless?
You didn't mention other security agencies. There were NDLEA, there was Civil Defense, there was Road Safety, there was the NIA, National Intelligence Agency. So they were all on the ground. And while INEC would excuse herself, and I totally understand, because the mandate of INEC is to come and conduct the election, and
not
make
to change
sure they follow the electoral laws and the election rules and guidelines and rules. You know, the security personnel, for me, we are complacent in this challenge.
But even INEC, you talked about something very fundamental, the need to insulate or isolate the voting, unit. I mean, polling units. And
now, when you say these things about the security of the ballot, there is a particular measurement, or there is a space that must be given. But these things are good in paper. Yeah. But in the reality of it in the election, I was in a particular polling that was about to open. In that polling, they have 1,721 registered voters. There was this agitation about who would be the first to vote, because a lot of them came out very early as 6:30, they were already there, filled up. At 8:30 when they wanted to start, there was so much tension and so much pushing around. At that point, the coppers, adult coppers that are there, can't really do much at that point to manage these people. And that is the reason why there is this security personnel. People are supposed to behave in an orderly manner. If they don't do that, that's why you have 4 security personnel and then security not far from the polling units to be able to help you coordinate all of that.
Right. Okay, let's get back to Mbu to get his last line, because we're rounding up. Mbu, are you there? Get your last line. How do we deal with these 2 critical challenges that became prominent? Vote buying, weaponization of violence, as we heard from, and so on. These are some of the things that define this election. How do we, address them going forward?
One is for us to for the National Assembly to, and then the President to pass and sign the National Electoral Offenses Commission. That's very important, because when we get that commission, the prosecution of electoral offenders will become easier. So now we have identified vote buying. EFCC have arrested a few people and all of that, but that's just a component of it. There have been also other parts of electoral offenses that have been committed during the elections. So we need to start setting examples with people that have been arrested. That's one. 2 is also for the security agencies themselves to start doing a sort of purging for themselves, where a police officer is caught to have either also collected bribe or participated in the sharing of the largesse. He or she needs to be shown the way out of.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mbu, for those recommendations. I think we have to let you go at this point. We're rounding up. Thank you very much for your perspectives. Now, let me get your last line, Paul. With regards to these issues, very quickly. We're rounding up.
My last line still remains that for INEC, INEC should not celebrate the victory yet, but go back and also audit what it has done in this election. In terms of, for instance, remember before the election, there was concerns around voter allocation to polling units, and I heard Ima keep making reference to that. There were 75 polling units in Ekiti that had over 1,000 voters. There were 9 polling units that have 2,000 voters. There is 1 polling unit in Ado that has 3,429 voters, which makes management of election a problem.
Very difficult.
We had people that based on our data, in 34% of polling, people that came to vote and could not find their detail on the beavers because their name was on the register and they couldn't quote this improperly on the beavers. So these are all the challenges that I thought need to be reviewed, especially before the Osun election by INEC.
Okay, in 30 seconds, Emmanuel, your last line.
Politicians coming to Nigerians now is a good thing. Power has returned to Nigerians. But as a Nigerian, stop negotiating for 10,000. You have the power. You are the boss. You are now their employer. Demand for more. Demand for primary health care centers. Demand for education. Demand for infrastructure. Demand for hospitals. The power, it is now in our hands to fix this country. Because with the Electoral Act 2022,
has returned the power.
And then for the person, for you, before you finish, for you that is at home watching, looking at how the powers has gone back to the hands of the people, you must now go ahead and register
Get your PVC.
and get your PVC. So you can now exercise that power to elect who will lead you in 2023. Thank you.
That's a very powerful one. Nigerians should take up the challenge. You can right the wrongs. You can also decide your destinies, but do that wisely. Don't negotiate for money, but negotiate for development and, of course, things that would better the life of yourself and your children and those generations to come. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Paul James, Program Manager, IAGA Africa, Emmanuel Njoku, Director, Governance and Democracy, Connected Development, and Mbu Eno, Head Election Observation, CJID. On their behalf and the technical crew, my name is Shafiu Suleiman. Have a wonderful time ahead.